So what we're going to talk about is over on the left-hand side in my list of icons here, there's one down towards the very bottom that says marketing and follow-up. We're going to jump back and forth between AutoWriter and the marketing module a bit as we go through our conversation. If we look, the upper icon in the upper left-hand corner says auto follow-up, and that actually is going to give us a drop-down menu. Underneath auto follow-up, there's two options there. There's send letters and there's closed RO follow-up. What the closed RO follow-up will do is it will say, well, I'm going to look back to the date and time of the last time we sent closed RO follow-up and send either a letter or an email, a user-definable setting, based upon the last time that was sent. Now, we're going to go take a look at configuration here in just a moment, but with the closed RO follow-up, again, it's actually looking at a date and time stamp. So again, somebody has to physically come out and do whatever we'd like to do in order to send those. Now, I did say either email and or letter. Before we get into the closed RO follow-up, I'm going to actually jump over to the setup icon out here on the right-hand side. As we get into the setup piece, in the marketing setup, hover down to the bottom where it says send repair order follow-up during EOD. EOD stands for end of day, and you'll notice my options there are never, always, or prompt. So again, if you're running end of day, and I'm a strong advocate of in the reporting module, running end of day, what you can do is you can have that closed repair order follow-up happen just on a nightly basis. So shop's done for the day, we're going to run our end of day process. It's going to send those letters. And again, what it will do is, let's say we close up at 6 o'clock at night. Each night as I run end of day, it says, great, any invoice that was finalized at, before this time, so let's say it's 6 o'clock straight up. So then now we go to run it the following day. It says, well, let's look at the time and date stamp of each closed repair order. Let's go back to the last time we sent it. So again, it's looking at that time and date stamp to determine who we should send a letter to. Out to the right, you'll notice there are options for email or letter, letter only, email only, and or email and letter. So again, we're going to define the type of media that we're going to send. When you're using the repair order follow-up during end of day, the most common configuration we see is email only. Let's say we close 20 repair orders in a day, and we happen to capture 10 email addresses for customers as we entered them into the system. Well, now when we go through our repair order, our end of day, it's going to send 10 emails. If we're doing email or letter, then what it does is it says if the customer has what appears to be a valid email address, then we're going to go ahead and send them an email. If they don't, we're going to print a hard copy letter. So now if I've got 20 closed invoices, 10 email addresses, I'm going to send 10 emails and I'm going to print 10 pieces of paper. Well, as soon as we go to print those pieces of paper, well, then now somebody has to do something with them. We've got to put them in an envelope, we've got to put an address on it, put a stamp, put it in the mail in order to send that letter. So again, email only is much simpler because now, again, not only is there no cost encumbered, but we're also sending that email off, again, as we go through each night during end of day. So we've got letter only, email and email or, and or email only. So as we go through our configuration, if I was to set that to email only, and then now when I go from never to either prompt or always, and again, when it comes to prompt or always, if I'm sending it during end of day, I'm going to always send it. If you prompt, it'll ask whether it should do it yes or no. And if you give the shop an opportunity to say no, well, they might, and you don't know for sure whether they're sending them or not. Always just says, let's just send it. And therefore, it just becomes inherently part of the end of day process. One last piece as far as the closed RO follow-up is concerned. If I have never been using this, again, I've been on AutoWriter for 10 years, and I've never used this closed RO follow-up piece. What it actually does is the very first time we configure it, it actually sets my date and timestamp. So if I set that to always, when I go to save that setting, what it's going to do is it's essentially going to say it's 11 o'clock Central Time on June 12th. So therefore, that's our starting point. We're going to send the letters from this point forward. We're not going to go historically back, let's say a year, 10 years, however long the data goes, and send those letters to customers. So again, the first time you configure it is when it sets that delta, that date and or time parameter. So again, underneath auto follow-up, if I just wanted to initiate that send on my schedule, then I could do the closed RO follow-up, come in here periodically and send that. And or sending it through end of day, a much more reliable way to go about it, because then again, it happens in theory each night as the shop finishes and would send to the customers that had had work done in that day's time frame. So we got the closed RO follow-up. The other option up here says send letters. And as we look at the send letters piece, the send letters is a fairly prescribed piece of marketing. We'll talk about the configuration that's behind the scenes in our webinar on Thursday, or coming up in a couple of days' time, or in a subsequent one if you're watching this as a recorded webinar. But you'll notice 4 tabs across the bottom: new customers, repeat customers, checklist customers, and then shop code customers. And we like to change terminology a bit in the marketing module. Shop codes are really labor operations. So the combination in a category and a labor operation as we go through. So we have a new customer, and it tells me that there are 24 new customer letters to send. We can define the letter, we can define what we're sending, and then if I wanted to see the customers that we're actually sending to, I would click on that print icon where it shows me that these are the 24 new customers that we're going to send to. The icon, the piece of, or the letter versus the silhouette, tells me that these customers have an email address on file that appears to be a valid email address, something@something.something, versus the other customers don't have an email address. So anyone with the silhouette is going to just get that piece of paper printed as we go through. I looked at a customer that's in my list. How about Missy Smith? I'm going to go back over into RO Writer for just a moment. I'm going to pull up Missy in history, and we'll go ahead and we'll pull up Smith, M, and there's Missy Smith and her 99 Dodge Neon. What makes her a new customer or eligible for a new customer list? I went in to look at the Edit Customer window, and then down here at what's called the Other Info tab. And again, for those of you that are looking at my screen, you're seeing something a little different than what you're used to. Again, these are the screens in Gen 2. Same information, laid out in a little bit more cohesive or manageable manner. Down to the lower left-hand corner of the Other Info tab, there's a section on marketing. You will notice that there is no check mark in this box that says new customer letter sent. The 2 elements that new customer letter looks for is the number of visits, the number of finalized invoices greater than 0, and is this box not checked? That would make them then eligible for that new customer letter. So again, there's our friend Missy Smith. If I had never done this before, and I've got thousands upon thousands of customers there, what I could do is I could say, well, let's mark them as sent. Then now it's going to go ahead and it's going to flag them all as having been sent. So now it's anybody from this point forward that would be a new customer that we'd want to send to. I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell it to select none and tell it not to send to anybody, but just turn my friend Missy back on, because if I wanted to have it not send a letter to Missy, I could then now say mark sent, and you'll notice my count goes from 24 down to 23. Essentially what that mark sent did is it said, let's go back over into RO Writer. And again, I'm going to have to close back out of the history and come back in. But let's go into that particular customer, and let's go ahead and let's mark them as having been sent a new customer letter. And again, whether we did it en masse for a large amount of customers and or whether we did it one at a time, again, in this case, there's that check mark where the new customer letter has been sent. As we look at the repeat customer letters, you'll notice repeat customer letter sent here. And what the repeat does is it allows us to define what's the number of visits at which point they become a repeat customer. So again, it's looking at this value here, greater than a configurable setting, and is this box checked? So again, very similar in their behavior, new customer versus repeat customer. The checklist letters are a little bit different, meaning when I went and looked at my checklist, I've got 7 letters to send. And again, if I looked at my list, among them, my friend Mr. David Clark. We're going to send David an email as we go to follow up. But if I was to go back into the history, I'm going to pull up David Clark. And there's my friend David with his 2008 Ford Escape. And if I was to look at the services button in the upper left-hand corner, there's my services, and he had 2 different checklist items. They're the ones that have no labor operation associated with them. And then they were both designated to have been due on a date that's somewhere in the past. So again, in this case, April 8th, both of these services were recommended based upon a previous visit's checklist as we went through. As we go through the list, you'll notice there are 3 elements there that have both a labor operation and category. associated, each of those is somewhere out into the future. So we will not have started marketing to those even when we get to our shopcode marketing piece. So again, with the checklist, it's a finalized item on a checklist where the date is now either current or past due, meaning if it was due today or somewhere in the past, then we'll see those on our checklist as part of our checklist letters as we go through. One last tab that's over there, and it says shop codes. And again, what I termed as shop codes was really a labor operation, a job that was performed on a transaction. So again, if I looked at my list of shop code letters, what you're going to find is that, well, Mr. Clark doesn't exist in here, only because if I went back and looked at his history and looked at the services window, again, September, October, or August of 2022, and then September of 2019, when those would be due. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull up a different customer, Mr. Adams, and we'll see where we find Mr. James Adams and his 07 Ford Focus. When I look at the services there, again, he's showing up on my checklist because on 5/31 we were saying that an oil change would have been due based upon when we had preferred this previously. So again, checklists based upon the checklist in our writer. The shop codes is really, again, a different term for a labor operation, when this job was performed on this invoice. And again, when we look at finalizing a transaction, it doesn't matter how the labor job got added, whether it was a smart job that was mapped to a labor operation. We use the labor button, any one of our different punch-out catalog integrations. As long as that labor operation was performed, the shop code follow will pick up that that's a service that's done on some regular schedule and give us the option or the indication that we should send that customer a letter. I'm going to cancel back out of here, and I'm going to close out of my automatic follow-up system, because to the right of that, the auto follow-up is fairly prescribed, meaning there's configuration that surrounds it that helps to define its behavior, but there won't be too much variation on a day-to-day basis. Versus if I went and used the marketing option is what would allow us to go ahead and define a parameter to drill down into our data. So if you look at it, we can either do one per customer or one per vehicle, certainly not much in terms of a subset of our customer list there. However, if I said to use customer and vehicle criteria, these two tabs for customer and vehicle criteria light up. So if I'm looking at customer and vehicle criteria, I could tell it I'd like to send the customers from this zip code, or whose last visit was greater than this date, or spent and or number of invoices in a given time frame. For the vehicle, I'm looking for over this mileage or this year, make, and model. So again, with the marketing piece, you can really drill down more into your local data in order to define the list of customers that we're sending to. Shop code criteria would allow us, and again, shop code equals labor operation, to say, well, let's look for everybody that had an oil change service in this time frame. So we'll tell it, maybe we'll pick up our base oil change, but I'll tell it anything in the category of LOF in this time frame. So again, shop code criteria lets you look at a labor operation based upon a date range that we perform. Shop code criteria probably most commonly used, at least in this example, for state inspections. If they're due once a year, once every other year, let's say we're now right in the middle of the month of June, if I wanted to go ahead and say, well, let's look for everybody that had an inspection done in the month of July of 2017, then I could go ahead and send them a letter, send them an email to remind them that, hey, by the way, it's probably time to get that inspection done again. So again, you can use a shop code letter to define a specific time frame and labor operation or category that we're working from. As we're using the marketing option, we really have three different output options. If you look down here, what letters should we send, and should we send letters and emails and or emails or emails and, so again, what's our output options as we go through? If we'd like, we can print mailing labels, so again, so we went through and we created a subset of our customer list and we printed a whole bunch of letters. Now I'd like to print mailing labels. And again, we've got 6 different label stocks for you to choose from. Go ahead and print those mailing labels. The one caveat that I'll give you when it comes to printing mailing labels is that it's going to start at position 1. You look at most label stock, there's, let's just say, for example, 3 columns across, 10 labels down. As we go to print, it's going to print on that very first label in the upper left-hand corner. So it's going to expect a full page of labels each time as we go to print. But again, define the stock. You can go ahead and you can print those mailing labels, and now I don't have to have somebody sit there and hand address all of the envelopes as we go through. You also print up a phone follow-up list. So as opposed to sending them an email or a letter that says, hey, your state inspection is due in July, you can print up a list of all the customers that we had performed that service for in the month of July of 2017 and just start calling, picking up the phone to reach out and let the customers know that, hey, time for you to come back in for that service. So as we're going through, again, we've got our shop code criteria, and then we're printing the phone follow-up list as we go along. Our order options, not sure this is still relevant, but back in the day, if you were printing, let's say, postcards or letters and you were going to be doing a mass mailing, the post office used to give you a break if you would group them together based upon zip code. It made sorting easier. Not sure if that's still the case or not, but that's the reason that exists, is so that you can either put them just based upon customer name and or if you wanted to group them together based upon zip code. Again, back in the day when postcards and or letters were really the only or the main communication methodology, that did make a difference. I'm not sure that it's still relevant today. As we finish up this morning's webinar, the last thing we want to take a look at is this reports icon here. In the reports icon, as I pull up this window here, you'll notice there are a handful of different reports that are there. There are only a couple that are prefixed with an asterisk. As we go through, again, follow-up list and then fleet follow-up list. The difference of whether you end up on one or the other of these, again, goes back into that edit customer window over on the ROWriter side. Inside of edit customer other info, there are two other boxes that we didn't talk about in this marketing section. There is the disable marketing. And if you click on disable marketing, what it does is it says, I'm going to exclude this customer from any marketing efforts. So whether they've sent a new customer, a repeat customer, checklists, shop codes, if we say disable marketing, it basically says we are not going to use this customer's information for any purpose in the marketing module, or at least I should say any purpose for us to send information to that customer. If you flag them as a fleet account, then they'll also get removed from, let's say, the new customer, the repeat customer, the shop code follow-ups as a fleet customer, but then also they'll end up on what we call the fleet follow-up list in this window here. The lists themselves look exactly the same. And if I went back and said, let's go back just to the 31st, and I clicked on report, what the follow-up lists do is those elements we saw in the checklist and in the shop code, it gives us a printed list of, well, let's see, James Adams, and here's the phone number we have on file for James, here's the vehicle that needs service, and oh, by the way, here's the service that needs to be performed, and oh, by the way, it came from a shop code follow-up versus this one was on a repair order checklist. So it tells you exactly where those elements came from. So again, the follow-up list is just there for us to go ahead as opposed to just going ahead and sending email and or letters. If we wanted to have somebody pick up the phone and call, we could do that using the follow-up list as well. As you get down beneath that, the other icons or the other reports that are there for the most part are just looking at our relevant data. Meaning if I said, well, let's see what zip codes my customers come from. Now the zip code report and any of the others that don't have the asterisk in front of them are not looking at a date range. They're looking at all of my data. So if I was to print this, it doesn't matter if the customer had a visit in this time frame, it's just going to give me the listing of here are all of the different elements that are in my database. So again, I printed that customer zip. You can see that by far and away, 33408 are most common, fairly prevalent, and then again, you get into some others that are much smaller on the scale. So you can go ahead and you can print those reports, but it looks at all of my data, not just a subset based upon a date range. There is one exception to that, and that's the one that's at the very bottom of my list. It's called the customer retention. It also does not pay attention to these dates on the right-hand side. When I click on report, it says, well, we're going to compare customer behavior over two different date ranges. So I'll use my automatic dates and tell it I'd like to see last year to date compared to this year to date. What you'll notice is it's just changing my date range. I said, well, I'd really like to look at last year. So we'll do 12/31 versus this year to date. Well, I could certainly change that. It's the dates up here that matter. So all it's going to do is it's going to compare customer behavior over two different date ranges. Let's say I'd like to look at my customers that, well, let's see, they spent more than $500 last year. So I'm going to put in my date range 1, spent greater than 500, and I'd like to sort it based upon what they spent in descending value. So I'd like to see which customer spent the most with me, and let me see their spending habits at least to this point in 2018. So again, I click on OK. So we've defined the 2 date ranges that we're going to compare. We have also defined the filter parameter, because I don't want to see this for every customer in my database. I just want people that's, in my case, greater than $500 last year. So it's got to wheel through all my customers that are in my database to determine exactly which ones qualify for the report. And it's got to figure out, well, what did they spend last year versus what have they spent this year? Again, you'll see as it's compiling, it's going to take just a moment to get through all of the different data. I'm going to jump over back to our writer for just a moment, so that as we're sitting here waiting, we're not just filling in or putting the space in as we go along. So in that marketing section in the lower left-hand corner, as we look last visit, number of visits, and then amount spent. So if we would look back at that filter criteria we were just looking at, again, if I told it number of visits, well, that's the value it's looking towards. If I had told it last visit, again, that's the value it's looking towards. And a visit is defined as a finalized invoice. So if a customer came in, we wrote up an estimate, and the customer decided not to have the work done, then it doesn't count as a visit. A visit is a finalized invoice as we go through. Again, the amount spent is a sum total by customer, regardless of vehicle. So again, if I had 10 different vehicles, they'd all been in for one $30 oil change, well, that would be an amount spent of $300. It's not the amount spent on this specific vehicle. Again, our checkboxes for new customer, repeat, disable, and then fleet account. And then the birthday value is just there as a way that we can capture. There is not any marketing that's being done, at least through the marketing module, that falls off or uses that birthday value as we're looking in this list here. One last piece, and that is you'll notice over in the email setting, the lower right-hand corner, this would be where we would capture the customer's email address. And the way that the email behaves is it looks to see if it thinks it's a valid email address. And what I mean by that is, in this case, we'll say it's james@gmail, and I'm going to put the dot in there and then pause for just a moment. You'll notice on the right-hand side, my send checkboxes as well as my save and send email not lit up as of yet. If I go ahead and put in .com, now it says, well, that looks like it could be a valid email address. It is something@something.something. And then you'll notice the send box automatically gets checked, and then to the right, save and send email, giving us an opportunity to, let's say, send a thank you for going ahead and providing us their email address. If you did not want an email address to be used for marketing purposes, so the customer gives it to you and says, well, you have an estimate or an invoice to me. However, I don't want you to send me coupons and discounts and special offers. Again, if you uncheck that box, and now you'll notice my save and send email grayed out because it doesn't think that we have a valid email to use for marketing purposes. So again, in that customer window down in the lower right-hand corner on Gen 1, just down at the green, again, the same exact boxes and buttons appear as we go through, but this is how we would capture the customer's email address and define whether or not the marketing module should be using that for marketing purposes. So back over into the marketing module where my report has finished compiling, I'm going to print that to the screen. As I pull it up on screen, what you're going to notice is, well, here are our customers who spent in range 1 greater than $500. So range 1 was Jan 1 of 2017 through December 31st, 2017. And we've got Charlie Kim up here that had spent on 2 different invoices, $33.64.50, who has not yet been back to see us yet this year. See, I've got Jerry Parker where he was 3 invoices last year, 3 invoices this year, a little bit cheaper. So we're down 21.66%, at least in terms of what he's spent. Now, I don't have a ton of dummy data inside of my system, but again, you get the idea of what the customer retention report does, is it looks at customer behavior over 2 different date ranges. So maybe I want to reach out to my best customers to determine, is there a certain reason that we haven't yet seen them this year? So compare customer behavior over 2 different date ranges, and that's the customer retention report down there at the very bottom of my reports in the marketing module.